Hi, it's Katrina. Some discoveries have the ability to change history forever. Today, I'll be taking you through the shocking revelation of World War Zero, the biggest and most impressive temple of the ancient world, and a myth that's been confirmed by science. Civilization in the ice. Recent evidence has appeared to suggest that there is something exceptional hidden underneath the Antarctic ice. A large object has supposedly been found in Antarctica that will change history forever. The issue is that the object is still hidden under about 2 miles of ice. I really want to know what's hidden under there, don't you? I'm not saying I want Antarctica to melt and flood the world, but I do want to know what's going on under all that ice. 2 miles beneath the ice is something the size and shape of a city large enough to house 40,000 people. NASA's Operation Icebridge recently captured photographs of the icy continent that show a large mass under the ice. NASA, of course, won't even speculate on the mass being a city. However, conspiracy theorists believe it's a frozen metropolis. They say the city is inhabited by a mysterious group of beings who dwell in secret beneath the ice. The satellite images of Antarctica do show something strange, but it's not irrefutable proof of an ancient civilization. There has been a lot of controversy lately over the satellite images of a so-called pyramid in Antarctica. Scientists claim the pyramid is nothing but a rocky mountain buried in snow. Others say it's evidence that an advanced race of beings once dominated Antarctica. Could there have once been humans or human-like creatures in Antarctica? Could they have built cities, tombs, and obelisks that are currently hidden underneath the ice? Most compelling of all, could they have adapted to the frigid cold, and are they still alive in Antarctica right now? Those are the questions that keep popping up all over the internet. Any thoughts? Let me know in the comments. Impossible Heroglyphs. You are going to be in total shock over what was discovered in Australia. Experts have found hieroglyphs that look as if they were made by ancient Egyptians. It appears that ships full of Egyptian scribes may have reached the land down under thousands of years before European explorers. This kind of discovery could change history in a big way. It has everyone very excited. You already know that the Egyptians were master builders. They constructed the pyramids in a mere 20 years, as if it was a hobby project. They built great temples to their mysterious gods, and they even tunneled deep underground like humanoid moles. Now it seems as if they were also fantastic shipbuilders. I mean, of course they were. They were sometimes even buried with ships, and there are detailed explanations in tombs of how their ships were built. They were pretty advanced. So the question remains, did the Egyptians sail out of the Mediterranean Sea, down the coast of Africa, across vast oceans of water, and land in Australia? Let's look at the hieroglyphs so you can come to your own conclusions. Check these things out! They look like Egyptian hieroglyphs, right? The strange symbols were found at the Brisbane National Park, shattering mainstream theories on history. However, the discovery isn't that new. In fact, it's extremely old. The hieroglyphs were first seen in the early 1900s. There are about 250 of them across the area. Even before Europeans found them, locals living in the region had been telling stories about the hieroglyphs for years. They have been around since anyone can remember. Media coverage and scientific investigation have both been seriously lacking. The hieroglyphs in Australia have been utterly ignored. Part of the reason is that the Gosford glyphs, as they are known, are not 100% confirmed as authentic. Some scientists say yes, they are definitely real. Others think the hieroglyphs are a hoax. Though if they are a hoax, they were made by a prankster centuries ago. There are a few working theories right now. The most popular theory is that the hieroglyphs were written in an archaic style used early in Egyptian history. It's a style that not many scholars can make sense of. When researchers Mohammed Ibrahim and Yusuf Hakim traveled to Australia to translate the strange glyphs, they were left with their jaws on the floor. According to the two men, who spent most of their lives researching Egyptian hieroglyphs, the ones in Australia are legitimate, authentic, real, verified, whatever you want to call it. And now for a quick break because it's shoutout time! I want to give a huge thank you to Candace Perry and the Tribal Chief for supporting this channel. We wouldn't be here without you guys. Thanks so much for your support. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries that could rewrite history because we've got a lot. Civilization in the Amazon. This incredible monument from 3,000 years ago was not supposed to appear in the jungle. Scientists are shocked. Historians around the world are sweating over their history books, knowing that they are going to need to be rewritten. This is Monte Grande, a humongous archaeological monument that spans 2 acres in the Amazon jungle of Peru. Monte Grande is a huge mound of formed earth and stone built by a civilization around 3,000 years ago. It stands as tall as a 5-story building, rising inconspicuously above rice paddies and pastures near the city of Jaén. For much of modern history, nobody knew about Monte Grande. It was overgrown, covered in bushes and trees. The outside world didn't know the mound existed, but locals did. It began to be excavated by archaeologist Quirino Oliveira in 2010. Oliveira already knew about the mound, but had no idea how truly gigantic it would prove to be. During excavations, archaeologists realized they were dealing with a monumental structure. They found walls 9 feet tall, cracking pieces of beige plaster, huge staircases made of boulders, and lots of shards of pottery. You might be a little confused as to why Monte Grande is changing history. It's just a mound, right? What could be so important? The sheer scale of this mysterious monument proves it must have been built by a highly advanced civilization. The civilization must have also boasted a complex hierarchy of workers and enough food to feed everyone involved in the project. There is no name for the civilization who built Monte Grande. Nobody knows where they lived or what they called themselves, but they appear to have been part of a vast Amazonian culture that dominated the jungle thousands of years ago. Oliveira said nothing as big and as old as Monte Grande has ever been excavated in the Peruvian Amazon before. He seriously doubts it was the only one of its kind. Are there more monuments lost in the jungle from an extinct culture? Should we be looking for them? Let me know what you think down below. World War Zero. World War Zero may have caused the collapse of the Bronze Age 3,200 years ago. New evidence has brought to light an insane theory that might be so crazy that it's true. The theory goes that 8 big civilizations from the ancient world waged an epic war that changed the world. It was so devastating that the Bronze Age collapsed, and Mediterranean civilizations were plunged into chaos. The civilizations involved include the Egyptians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Cypriots, Mycenaeans, Minoans, Hittites, and Canaanites. It's already a well-established fact that these 8 civilizations steeply declined 32 centuries ago. Famine, corruption, internal conflict, and war resulted in their societies crumbling. However, archaeologists and historians have never been able to agree on what precisely happened to cause the Bronze Age collapse. There have been a lot of arguments in favor of an enormous earthquake and subsequent tsunamis. There's also a theory that says climate change resulted in drought, which withered the crops, resulting in civilization's collapse. A fan favorite theory involves the mysterious sea people. The theory says that a group of seafaring, warmongering strangers arrived in the Mediterranean with an unstoppable fleet. Do you remember how the Mongols came out of nowhere and destroyed the world in the 13th century? They conquered everything from mainland China to Eastern Europe. While the sea peoples were like water Mongols. They went from port to port, destroying city after city until Pharaoh Ramses III stopped them. The sea peoples were almost definitely real. But were they responsible for starting World War Zero? World War Zero, D-Day. The theory of World War Zero comes from geoarchaeologist Eberhard Zanger. Just a few weeks ago, the Zurich-based scholar announced the Luwian culture of Anatolia launched an invasion so dramatic that it caused all the other powers of the Bronze Age Mediterranean to crumble. His theory, which he says is backed up by historical documents, is this. The Luwians were a coalition made up of various small kingdoms and principalities in Asia Minor. For thousands of years, these small kingdoms fought against one another. They were like squabbling tribes. Up until recently, historians didn't think too much about the Luwians. The culture has always been poorly understood, along with their history. But now, Eberhard is claiming that something exceptional happened around the year 1000 BC. Suddenly, the small kingdoms of the Luwians joined together to form an incredibly powerful entity previously unknown to historians. They morphed into a fighting machine. The new coalition of Luwians suddenly attacked the Hittite Empire, taking them out almost instantly. While the 8 civilizations I mentioned earlier had been dealing with their own problems, the Luwians had been plotting a world war. The Luwians invaded the Hittite Empire like Germany invaded Poland, then kept advancing. They attacked the Mycenaeans, Babylonians, and ultimately the Egyptians. But that was where the buck stopped. In a kind of reverse D-Day, Ramses III beat back the foreign invaders when they tried to penetrate the Nile. This is something that really did happen. The Sea People did try to invade Egypt, but failed epically. Around 1177 BC, there were 2 major battles, one on land and the other at sea. Ramses' force beat back the Sea Peoples on the beach and at the mouth of the Nile. According to ancient Egyptian texts, Ramses gathered an army the likes of which had never been seen before. It supposedly included a large number of foreign mercenaries. The army may have been so big because it was filled with soldiers from around the world, from places like Minoa and Cyprus and Assyria. All those who had been threatened by the Sea Peoples may have joined forces to crush them. Do you believe in the theory of World War Z? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Pyramids and human sacrifice in China. Strange carvings and evidence of human sacrifice is changing the way historians look at early Chinese culture. Put on your khaki pants and adventurer hat because this incredible story takes us to the Great Wall of China. For decades, villagers living in the hills of the Loess Plateau thought the crumbling rock walls near their houses were part of the Great Wall. But they weren't. Only recently did archaeologists check out the walls and see that, hey, wait a minute, this is a lost city. It has nothing to do with the Great Wall, it just so happens to be right beside it. Carbon dating has shown that the mysterious city of the Loess Plateau flourished long before the Great Wall was ever built. It dates back 4,300 years, 2 millennia before the first emperor of China commissioned the world's most famous wall. The dating is even more shocking because the city of the plateau is 500 years older than when Chinese civilization supposedly took root on the Central Plains. Kinda out of breath after that. The short and sweet of it is that before COVID, archaeologists found a lost city that predates Chinese civilization, which is already pretty ancient. Unfortunately, the whole pandemic dilemma caused archaeological investigations to slow down. Only now are they getting going again. Archaeologists are flabbergasted by what they are finding. Researchers have uncovered over 70 relief sculptures in stone. They have found unprecedented stone carvings of monsters, humanoid beasts, things that look like aliens, and serpents. These amazing sculptures are proof of an advanced civilization with unique beliefs and epic storytelling abilities. The city is now called Shimao. Archaeologists also found that the ruins of the magnificent city were sheltered by over 6 miles of walls. At the center of Shimao towered a pyramid 230 feet tall. The pyramid nearly gives the Pyramid of Giza a run for its money. Shimao is so incredible it will take your breath away. Researchers are now saying it was the true cradle of Chinese civilization. It's currently the largest known Neolithic settlement anywhere in the country. Sun Zhaoyong, the director of the Shanxi Provincial Institute of Archaeology, said Shimao is one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the last century. But who the Shimao's builders were remains a mystery. A ghoulish mystery at that. Near the east gate of the city, 6 pits were discovered full of human skulls. The skulls appear to be from sacrifice victims. The Wisconsin Giants. Do you believe in giants? Did you know that some people believe that Wisconsin was once the capital of an empire ruled by giants? The state of Wisconsin was once covered in ancient burial mounds created by lost cultures who thrived over 2,000 years ago. Most of the mounds are gone today, destroyed by the modern world. Starting with European immigrants in the 1800s, the gigantic mounds were plowed or leveled. This was done to make room for homes and farming fields. Many of them were also picked apart and used for building material. They had been filled with sand, rock, and soil. And it didn't take long for the mounds to be totally obliterated. During all the plowing and destroying, American settlers were finding bones and strange objects in the mounds. It soon became clear that the mounds were burials, and they weren't ordinary burials either. Reports started springing up all over Wisconsin that the people buried inside the mysterious mounds were humongous. Newspapers reported the discoveries of beings of a much larger stature than any known aboriginals. Skeletons of men and women who stood over 8 feet tall were continuously being found in the mounds. This should have immediately changed history, don't you think? Especially since Wisconsin was hardly the only state where giant skeletons were found on the regular. Similar giant skeletons were found in Maine, North Dakota, Virginia, Ohio, Iowa, and as far west as Nevada. Some of them were over 9 feet tall. It seems that there was obviously a race of giants living in North America 2,000 years ago. Giant skeletons from Virginia to Nevada are evidence enough. But then why is nobody talking about the extinct race of giants today? For some, it starts with a C and ends in unspiracy. While I can't prove it, I can tell you what many people believe is the truth. For over 140 years, the Smithsonian Institute has allegedly covered up the existence of giants. Each time gigantic bones were discovered, agents from the Smithsonian Institute recovered and destroyed them. I don't know why the Smithsonian Institute always gets such a bad rap. Their whole purpose is to gather and collect things and share them. I'm not sure exactly why they are always blamed for destroying history. But today, there isn't a single giant bone left in North America. The conspiracy is that scientists at the Smithsonian destroyed the giant bones as a way to prevent the Bible from being proven a reality. You might know the story of the Nephilim, the giants who appear in the Book of Genesis. For you longtime watchers, you definitely know the story. The short version is that the Nephilim were giant creatures made by the unholy union of angels and humans in the Bible. Physical proof of these giants could mean the Bible was telling the truth. The ancient decimal. The history of one very important mathematical tool has just been changed. The discovery isn't as profound as proving giants existed, but it's getting a lot of attention, and I thought you might like to know about it. Historians have found that the mighty decimal point was invented 150 years earlier than previously thought. The decimal point is something you and I take for granted every single day without even realizing it. The decimal point seems like such an obvious thing that people kind of assume it's always been around. But no, decimal points are necessary to break apart whole numbers into tenths, hundredths, and thousands. Without decimal points, computation wouldn't have advanced past the abacus. Versions of it have been around since the 10th century in Damascus and the 13th century in China. The modern decimal symbol wasn't invented until 1593. That glorious achievement goes to German mathematician Christopher Clavius. Wait, no it doesn't. Sorry, Christopher, let me pry that award out of your cold, dead hands and give it to a Venetian merchant by the name of Giovanni Bianchini. Just pardon my reach here. New research has shown that based on documents from between 1441 and 1450, Giovanni was using the decimal first. It wouldn't be as big of a deal if the time difference wasn't so big. 150 years is a lot. The first known decimal point appears on one of Giovanni's calculations of stellar coordinates. Although he was a merchant, he was also a professor of mathematics and astronomy at the University of Ferrara and a court astrologer. This guy was extremely talented and way ahead of his time. The Chachapoya. Over 1,000 years ago, the Chachapoya lived in the perpetual mists of Peru's beautiful cloud forests. The cloud forests are in the Andes Mountains, close to the very source of the Amazon River. The Chachapoya ruled this mist-shrouded fantasy land long before the Inca Empire ever took hold. Their civilization was ruled by shaman warlords. The Chachapoya didn't last forever. With the rise of the Inca Empire, they were defeated in battle. Their great citadel and their misty cities were abandoned, and the Chachapoya were exiled from history. It was only recently that archaeologists have started to find their lost cities. Strange mummies were discovered in a necropolis carved into the side of a cliff. Their great city of Cuelap was recently identified. Still, there is very little information about them. The only information modern scholars have about the Chachapoya comes from documents written by early European explorers. In 1553, Pedro Cieza de León wrote that the Inca received incredible resistance from the Chachapoya, more than from other groups they had conquered. It took a massive army to bring down the Chachapoya stronghold of Cuelap. After they were defeated, The Inca treated them very favorably. Instead of just subduing them and turning them into slaves, the Inca allowed them to live in their capital of Cusco. It's believed the descendants of Chachapoya cloud warriors are still living in that city today. But here's the craziest part, the part that you're here to learn about. Spanish chroniclers wrote that the Chachapoya were so white they were basically pale. They had fair, chalky skin, the same complexion as milk. They were extremely tall and looked very different from all other indigenous groups in South America. There are some wild theories about where the Chachapoya came from. You have to admit, it's really weird that there was a single group of pasty white people living in the Peruvian mountains 1,000 years ago. The way they were described, it sounds as if the Chachapoya were Viking or Germanic. It might be the case that ancient civilizations traveled far and wide, way more than we ever thought possible. It's already been confirmed that Viking warriors landed in Canada 1,000 years ago. What would have stopped the Vikings from traveling to Peru? Maybe nothing. In another instance, legendary explorer Percy Fawcett supposedly said that he encountered white-skinned tribal people with blonde hair while adventuring deep in the Amazon. Percy disappeared while searching for the lost city of Z, but before he vanished, he may have come into contact with descendants of the Chachapoya. Inhuman handprints. In the Stone Age, handprints were left inside of a cave in the dry desert of Egypt. The twist is that the handprints were not left by human beings. They appear to be the handprints of an entirely different species. Take a look at this, and what do you see? They look like ordinary human handprints, right? There doesn't appear to be anything that unusual, but the longer you look, the more apparent it becomes that there is something not quite right. The handprints are in Wadi Sura II, also known as the Cave of Beasts. It was discovered in 2002 by an amateur explorer looking for lost desert caverns near the border of Libya. Inside the cave are a smattering of amazing images. Some of them were painted, others were engraved. All of them were made roughly 8,000 years ago. Most of the images in the cave are fairly standard for Stone Age artwork. There are images of animals and scenes from everyday life, but there are a lot of handprints as well. Some of the handprints are really tiny. It was always assumed that they were the handprints of infants. This would be pretty heartfelt if true. You can imagine hunters in the cavern with their babies doing some finger painting, bonding as a family. But weirdly and ominously, the handprints were not made by infants. A recent study focused on the tiny handprints confirmed that they are too small and the fingers are too long. The tiny handprints do not belong to humans. So, who made them? Was it aliens? Was it a bizarre race of reptilians? The researchers behind the recent study think it may have been lizards. The current theory is that ancient hunters used lizard hands to make the small handprints. They would have chopped the legs off monitor lizards or crocodiles, then used the severed limbs like stamps. That's the only real explanation that scientists have. The other possibility is that there were walking, talking lizards doing finger paintings in the ancient Egyptian cave. Could these be the Illuminati reptilians everyone's talking about? China's flood myth verified. According to the Chinese flood myth, civilization in China began somewhere around the year 2000 BC. Keep in mind, this is a lot different from the biblical flood myth. This one has also been proven real by science. The Chinese myth says there was a great rainstorm that lasted for so long that not only were the crops washed away, but entire forests were swept off into the sea. Villages were washed away like sandcastles at high tide. It was a disaster of epic proportions. The flood happened during the reign of Emperor Yao. Most rulers have to deal with issues when they take the throne. There is always a war or a conflict or something that a president, king, emperor, or pharaoh comes up against. Emperor Yao had to contend with the complete and total destruction of his kingdom. To deal with the ceaseless flooding, the emperor appointed his greatest engineer to come up with a way to divert the water. The flood continued for 9 years, and his greatest engineer was killed for his failure. Talk about pressure at work. Then he was replaced by another engineer, his own son. It took 13 more years, but the engineer finally completed his task. He managed to create a series of ditches, blockades, and dams to push the flood water into the ocean. With China saved, thus began the Xia dynasty. This story has been told for the last 4,000 years. In modern times, historians didn't put much merit in it. There are thousands of myths from ancient China, most of them little more than fairy tales. That's all changed thanks to some incredible new evidence. Geologists collected sediment samples along China's Yellow River. Amazingly, the sediment samples showed evidence of flooding in the year 1900 BC. The story of the flood is 100% true. Actually, maybe like 99% true. Researchers don't know if Emperor Yao was real or if his engineer was killed for his failure. Emperor Yao, according to myth, lived until he was 99 years old. All scientists know for sure is what the sediment tells them. The flooding was so bad that researchers think it was the worst freshwater catastrophe of the past 10,000 years. They even figured out exactly how it happened. Scientists were able to trace the flood to an earthquake. The earthquake created a landslide which blocked the entire upper section of the Yellow River. For about a year, people would have been worried about a drought because the river would have been running so low. The landslide so effectively blocked the river that water accumulated behind it for 12 full months. When the natural dam finally burst, the flooding was like a tsunami, maybe even worse than a tsunami. The water level likely reached an elevation of around 700 feet above where the river was originally. Settlements and cities as far as 1,300 miles away were wiped off the map. One more thing before moving on. There are two versions of the flood myth. The first version is the most popular and the oldest, but the second version is a lot more similar to the story found in the Bible. In this version, the flood was caused by an angry water god. Civilization was only saved thanks to a gigantic celestial turtle and a mythical dragon named Yinglong. The Temple of Jupiter. Welcome to Heliopolis, the Roman city of the sun. To behold this grand city in times lost would have been to stand in the city of the gods themselves. It was one of the richest places in the ancient world. The city once stood in the country we now call Lebanon. Heliopolis was its name to the Greeks and the Romans, and nowadays it's known as Baalbek. 2,000 years ago, Heliopolis thrived in an astonishing way. There were humongous temples, palaces, theaters, and public works that would shame every modern nation. The most impressive of these ancient buildings was the Temple of Jupiter. It was positively monumental. In fact, the Temple of Jupiter was the largest temple anywhere in the Roman world. That should give you an idea of its scope and size. It was bigger than any temple built in the rest of the empire. Even though it was so huge, nobody today knows who built it or designed it. Nobody even knows when it was built. Experts think construction started on the temple around 16 BC and took almost a century to complete. The temple was dedicated to Jupiter, the Roman version of Zeus. Its columns were almost 100 feet high, making them the biggest in the classical world. I'm thinking you picked up on the theme here, the theme being big, but things are going to get even bigger. At the base of the now ruined temple, there are 3 humongous stones that stump scientists. There are 6 unbelievably humongous stones in Heliopolis. 3 of them together are known as the Trilithon, each one weighing between 830 and 880 tons. These 3 huge stones are part of the temple's podium wall. They are part of the actual building, meaning they were shaped and moved by human hands. That kind of weight is equal to 3 Boeing 747s, or 6 houses, or, and this one might be a shock, 13 space shuttles. Wow. So how did the ancient Romans shape and move these stones? Nobody has a clue, nor a hope or a prayer of ever figuring it out. The stones at Stonehenge only weigh 5 tons each, and scientists can't even figure out how those were moved. It's been almost 5,000 years. Come on, let's try to figure it out already. Things get even crazier because near the Temple of Jupiter are 3 more stones, each one more preposterous than the last. The Pregnant Woman Stone was discovered 3,000 feet from the temple. In 1996, scientists from Austria confirmed the block to weigh 1,000 tons. That's nothing though. There is also the Stone of the South, which weighs 1,242 tons. Then there is the Forgotten Stone, considered the largest stone ever quarried in human history. Over 2,000 years ago was when this stone was wrenched from the earth by human hands. The Forgotten Stone is 64 feet long, 20 feet wide, and 18 feet tall. But it's the weight of this thing that is going to blow your mind. The stone was discovered by scientists from the German Archaeological Institute in 2014. They confirmed its weight to be 1,650 tons. I want to show you something quickly. This is the obelisk of Hatshepsut. It's amazing, right? The obelisk is massive, considered an incredible feat of ancient Egyptian technology. It was built in honor of the gods at Karnak Temple in 1457 BC. Only one obelisk from ancient Egypt is bigger than the obelisk of Hatshepsut. I want you to know about the Egyptian obelisk because it weighs 343 tons. The Forgotten Stone of Baalbek is equivalent to roughly 5 obelisks of Hatshepsut. Thanks for watching! What kind of ancient technology do you think was used to carve the mysterious stones at Baalbek? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and stick around for more content from the past that you might have missed.
Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
Jurassic Pyramid. A pyramid from the days of the dinosaurs has allegedly been discovered by a scientist in Ukraine. The supposed pyramid was uncovered in Crimea, discovered completely by accident. Vitaly Go was the one who found the remains of the structure underground, very deep underground. The pyramid once stood about 150 feet high, and yet the entire thing was hidden under thousands of tons of soil. This suggests it had been covered by the shifting sands of the Earth as our planet went through volatile changes over the past 60 or 70 million years. Go believes it was built during the time of the dinosaurs by an early race of primitive humans. Keep in mind that this discovery has not been confirmed by any reliable source or discussed by any renowned scientist. The story has been floating around online, so it's impossible to say for sure what's true and what isn't. Go also allegedly discovered the mummified remains of a small creature within the foundation of the pyramid. The suggestion here is that the mummy either belonged to a previously unknown type of human or came from another world entirely. If the discovery is real, it will flip everything we know about human history on its head. It will mean that humans didn't evolve as recently as people thought. Instead, human beings may have existed alongside the dinosaurs. But our advancement was seriously postponed due to the asteroid that killed most of life on Earth. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. The female pope. Researchers from Australia recently announced in a press release that they have made a major discovery that could change history as we know it. They believe that they have found proof that a female pope existed in the Middle Ages. This is something that has been denounced as a myth by the Vatican. As far as church officials are concerned, no woman has ever held a position of power within their organization. And yet these researchers have found proof that Pope Joan may have been a real person. According to legend, Pope Joan disguised herself as a man in 9th century Rome. She then rose to the position of deacon, continued rising through the hierarchy of the church, and ultimately became the pope. Legend also has it that one day she had to stop a procession to give birth, much to the shock and horror of everyone in Rome. The female pope was then arrested, thrown in jail, and executed. Her name was officially removed from the list of popes, and the story was buried in the dusty corridors of history. No one has ever been able to confirm the legend until now. Researchers at Flinders University, Australia, were studying coins from the 1850s when they identified what appears to be the name Pope Johann Anglicus. This was her fake name during her time as pope. There is no historical record, and yet the name is very clearly written on these coins from the Middle Ages. They appear to be proof of a vast conspiracy by the church to cover up the woman who lied her way to the papal throne. The Jar Baby. Archaeologists in Israel unearthed a jar from 3,800 years ago. The jar contained an unexpected surprise, the skeletal remains of a baby. And while it's not totally unheard of for infants to be buried in jars thousands of years ago, it is a mystery as to why. Yoav Arbel, an archaeologist with the Israel Antiquities Authority, was one of the researchers behind the discovery. He believes the jar may have been a kind of representation for the womb. It may have been a way for ancient people to feel like they were returning the deceased infant back into its mother or into Mother Earth. In other words, it was a symbolic gesture of protection. The jar was discovered in the ancient city of Jaffa, which dates back about 4,000 years. It was one of the first port cities in the world, a place that's seen continuous human occupation for around 2,900 years. The discovery of the baby in the jar is reshaping how we view the ancient people who lived here. While the burial of a baby in a jar may seem strange and barbaric to us, to them it was the most respectable burial possible. The truth is that even in ancient times, people were not all that different from us. Researchers also found an ancient Greek mosaic from the 4th century AD in Jaffa, with an inscription reading, "This is it." Zvi Greenhut, head of the publication department at the IAA, says in essence it means, "This is life, like this is it," and that death is everyone's shared destiny. Clearly, people also had a solid sense of humor back then. I want to say a big thank you to Mark Heinrichs and Don Patterson for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries. The Temple of the Watchers. The mysterious Temple of the Watchers, located in Turkey, is a stone temple complex that was built 7,000 years before Stonehenge. The temple is more famously known as Göbekli Tepe. It is the most compelling archaeological site in the world by a long shot. The temple was built at the end of the last ice age, at a time before any other megalithic structures were made. Some of the stones used to build the monoliths here are as heavy as 15 tons. Everything at the temple points to a highly advanced civilization, and yet it predates Egypt, Sumer, Babylon, and all the other famous early cultures of the world. The temple is 12,000 years old, built when woolly mammoths were still around. Many consider it the oldest example of stone architecture in the world. There are some who think it may have been left behind by the Watchers, discussed in the forbidden Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is one of the non-canonical biblical texts. Within the book, Enoch describes what the world was like before the Great Flood. When God first made people, he sent a group of 200 angels known as Watchers to look after them. However, these Watchers became obsessed with human females, bred with them, and created abominations known as Nephilim. God was so disgusted that he sent a flood to eradicate all living things in the world. In biblical terms, this happened around 12,000 years ago. If the story of the Watchers is connected to Göbekli Tepe, it could mean the temple is the only remaining structure from before God flooded the planet. The Tomb of Jesus. Scientists from the National Technical University of Athens recently confirmed that the tomb of Jesus Christ is a lot older than previously believed. The tomb of Jesus Christ is believed to be the very real place where Jesus Christ was buried after his crucifixion. It's located underneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, in a primitive limestone cave that predates everything else on the site. In fact, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built over Jesus' burial place and the site of his crucifixion on purpose. This makes it arguably the holiest place in Christianity. But up until now, archaeological experts believed the tomb only dated to the Crusader period, about 1,000 years ago. When the new team ran new tests using the most advanced technology, their results were different. According to the report from National Geographic, scientists dated the tomb at 1,700 years old. It was used around the year 345 AD. Of course, this is still quite a while after Jesus died, allegedly around the year 30 or 33. Most historical accounts suggest the Romans were the ones who enshrined the tomb in 326. This was during the rule of Constantine I, who converted the Roman Empire to Christianity and began building monuments to Christ. But what does all of this mean? Does it confirm that Jesus of Nazareth was buried in the limestone cave? The answer is no. It does not 100% confirm the site of Jesus' death and resurrection, but it does make it more realistic, officially placing the tomb closer to the time when Jesus lived and died. Neanderthal inbreeding. Dutch researchers may have just solved the mystery of what happened to the Neanderthals. Neanderthals are believed to be our closest genetic relatives. We know that Homo sapiens lived alongside them for several thousand years and made it. We know this because we still have Neanderthal DNA in our bodies. In fact, Neanderthals were in Europe before Homo sapiens. We technically invaded their territory in the years before they went extinct. Throughout the centuries, scientists have put forth all kinds of theories to figure out why Neanderthals disappeared. Studies have shown that they were likely just as intelligent as us, and possibly bigger and stronger too. And yet, for some unknown reason, we came out as the dominant human species. Some think climate change killed the Neanderthals, just like it killed the woolly mammoth. Others believe Homo sapiens killed them on purpose. A team of researchers from multiple universities, led by Chris Vason from Eindhoven University of Technology, think it may have been inbreeding that led to the demise of the Neanderthals 40,000 years ago. They think that due to the small population, consisting of only a few tens of thousands across the world, they couldn't create a suitable bloodline. They had a difficult time mating outside their small gene pools and were forced to have babies with their own family. This may have led to genetic degradation, ultimately wiping out all the Neanderthals. Thor's Bifrost. In Norse mythology, the Bifrost was a glimmering rainbow bridge which connected the various realms in existence. For example, if you wanted to travel to Asgard from Midgard, or if you wanted to travel from Niflheim to Helheim, you needed to move along the Bifrost. It was a powerful ethereal portal guarded over by Heimdall, an Aesir god who watched over the bridge for any sign of incoming enemies. So why are we talking about a magical rainbow bridge from Viking myth? The answer is that a new theory states the Bifrost may not be as mythical as people think. It could be a very real thing known as the Einstein-Rosen Bridge, or what you might call a wormhole. The exact science of wormholes is still being worked out by the best minds we have, but the general idea is that particles can travel through a kind of hole in space-time. The particles cross the event horizon fast enough and escape on the other side of the wormhole tunnel in a completely different time and place. In essence, that's exactly what the legendary Bifrost does. It moves particles from one realm to another. Whether the ancient Norse had access to one of these wormholes is another story entirely. This sits in the same realm of pseudoscience as the pyramids being charging pods for alien ships, or the Inca carving stargates out of stone. That said, is it possible that a super intelligent race of beings from another realm appeared to the Norse centuries ago through wormholes, inspiring the myth of Bifrost? But then again, it's just as likely that no such thing ever happened. Heroglyphs in Australia. Egyptian hieroglyphs may have been found in Australia. If true, it will call into question everything we know about the ancient past, and even humanity itself. It's a theory that's been around for some time. Ancient Egyptian explorers somehow made it across the ocean and settled in Australia thousands of years before the famous Captain Cook. But for whatever reason, these settlers failed, and nobody ever went back. It now looks like we might have evidence of this legendary expedition. In a remote cave in eastern Australia, researchers uncovered mysterious hieroglyphic carvings. There is no known tribe in the area that speaks the strange language or that even used hieroglyphs. They also have no idea what the hieroglyphs seem to say, and yet their existence suggests there was a civilization here that understood the ancient Egyptian system of writing. They may have even spoken the same tongue as the ancient Egyptians. The hieroglyphs were left in the cave before the Pyramid of Giza was built. They appear to be about 5,000 years old. That was long before any civilization could complete transcontinental oceanic voyages. How they got there, who made them, and what they mean is still a mystery. Islamic Glass. 3 glass fragments were found in an ancient castle in Scotland in the late 1990s. Recently, these fragments of glass became a subject of interest for a community project called Eternal Connections. This project is looking at the mysterious history of Scotland and its Islamic connection. The strange thing about these glass fragments is that they were found in Carlaverock Castle, left there in the 13th century, but they didn't come from Scotland. The fragments of glass were from a vessel crafted either in Syria, Iraq, or Egypt in the 12th or 13th century. One of the fragments was even inscribed with an Arabic word meaning Allah. In the 13th century, glass was not a common commodity. It was used mainly for stained glass windows in cathedrals and churches, not for drinking vessels. Glass didn't come into the household until much more recently. Yet these 3 pieces came from a small drinking beaker crafted in an Islamic community. It then somehow made its way across the known world to a rural Scottish castle. Nobody knows how exactly that happened. All we really know is that there was obviously some kind of cultural connection between the Islamic world and Scotland 800 years ago. This connection could change much of what we know about Scotland in the medieval age. Ancient mammoth butchering site. Woolly mammoths once walked across most of North America. Even in the dry and desolate wasteland of New Mexico, the massive creatures roamed freely and prospered. This was until about 11,000 years ago, give or take a few thousand years. But what's really interesting is that humans lived alongside these mammoths, and they hunted them. A mammoth butchering site was just found in New Mexico, and researchers say it could be the earliest evidence of human beings in North America. It's come as a major controversial find because the butchering site was used 37,000 years ago. It's generally accepted that humans only arrived in North America about 13,000 years ago. You can see that there is a pretty big discrepancy at work here. If the research team is correct and humans were butchering mammoths at this site almost 40,000 years ago, all our history books will need to be rewritten, and yet they still might be wrong. The issue is that no one has ever been able to determine an exact date for when people arrived in North America. It was thought to be 13,000 years ago, then the number was boosted to 16,000 years ago, and then again to 26,000 years. This butchering site pushes the date back another 10,000 years. And in 2017, a study investigating yet another mammoth bone site near San Diego showed proof of human activity to 130,000 years ago. So, nobody knows what to think anymore.
Ancient city. The remains of an ancient city have been discovered in southern Africa. Researchers believe the complex ruins of the walled city that they found could have been built 200,000 years ago. This would completely change history, because as far as mainstream scientists believe, the earliest civilizations and urban settlements began to develop between 4000 and 3000 BC, when agriculture and trade allowed people to stay in one place. If true, the discovery would show that human beings have been dwelling in cities for 195,000 years before the Pyramid of Giza was built. It's important to say that right now, there is no archaeological evidence that this city dates back 200,000 years. It's all speculation. It's also important to note that the oldest major structures built by humans go back only to about 10,000 years ago. The site, located in Mozambique, was allegedly discovered for the first time by a pair of researchers named Michael Tellinger and Johann Hein. This site is quite complex, spanning a massive area in the desert. It is made up of circular structures and farming areas. There appear to be large enclosed settlements where ancient humans lived, and the remains of narrow roads connecting one settlement to another. From the air, it almost looks like a dream catcher. The area is speckled with these circular ruins of the settlements, with the roads winding like spider webs between them. Now, here's what we know about the controversial dating. Michael Tellinger claims the dolerite erosion has been dated to 200,000 years ago, which indicates the structures are the same age. But nothing is conclusive, and no mainstream archaeologists have even mentioned the site, so it's quite difficult to know for sure. What we have found that is 200,000 years old is bedding used by ancient humans 200,000 years ago found in South Africa in a cave. The layer of grass and ash found inside the cave was about a foot thick and would have been a comfortable bed back in the day. However, this is a far cry from an entire city. The Great Flood and the Comet. Back in the 17th century, science as a study began to emerge. As human knowledge progressed, religion and the dependence on the Bible began to be questioned, and so scientists tried to make sense of the miracles in the Bible by using physics. This takes us to the year 1680. In Manhattan, people looked to the sky and saw something that made them shriek in terror. There was a comet streaking across the heavens, so bright that it blazed like a fireball in the middle of the day. Nobody in Manhattan had ever seen a comet before, and they were terrified that it would crash into the world and kill them. But then there was Sir Isaac Newton, the genius scientist who figured out gravity. He looked at the comet, calculated its trajectory, and used it to confirm his universal theory of gravitation. And then another scientist by the name of William Whiston took the calculations even further. He claimed that the comet passed Earth 2,000 years prior, and it had come so close that it sprayed the world with water from its tail. He claimed the comet exerted such immense gravitational force that the oceans were pulled apart from the planet's crust. All that extra water was what led to the biblical flood. We know today that William Whiston was wrong, but in the 17th century, the people of Manhattan didn't know. And so, in one bold claim, the scientist changed history. He made the flood in the Bible a real event caused by a passing comet. Ancient swords. A pair of swords from 2,800 years ago have been discovered in the small Bavarian town of Andex. These swords date all the way back to the Iron Age and are currently the oldest iron weapons found in southern Germany. What makes the swords so unique is that they were forged in the Hallstatt period, a span of time in both the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. It was a transitional period and a time of great technological leaps. Each sword was found deposited in a shallow grave among other objects that had clearly been offered as burial goods: ceramic vessels, other swords, bronze jewelry, and things that would have been valuable to Iron Age people. The people here were called the Hallstatt culture, and they flourished in Europe from around the 12th century BC to the 6th century BC. But these swords in particular were made at the exact point when this culture left the Bronze Age and entered the Iron Age, and that's what makes them so important. We can see in these swords history actually changing, because here's the thing, the swords are a little different. Both were dumped in graves in the 8th century BC, but one was slightly older than the other. The older one was made in the exact shape and style of a bronze sword, yet crafted out of iron. The slightly newer one, which was probably only newer by a few decades, was made in the design of iron swords to make use of the stronger material. This really captures the shift from bronze to iron in a way we've never seen before. The earliest artwork. A group of cave paintings in Indonesia is rewriting what we know about the history of artwork. The paintings were found in an Indonesian cave, and they date back 39,900 years. That makes them among the oldest cave paintings ever found. They are on the island of Sulawesi, where some of the first cave artists thrived. It was like the Renaissance Florence of the Stone Age. But here's why the discovery has changed history. Up until the Indonesian cave paintings, the oldest similar pieces of artwork were found strictly in prehistoric Europe. But now, a painting of a pig deer in Indonesia may just be the oldest figurative art in the world. This is totally bizarre because it shows that Europe and Indonesia began practicing similar styles of artwork at the same time, when they had absolutely no way of ever meeting one another. Archaeologist Maxime Aubert from Griffith University in Queensland says even older cave art will almost definitely be discovered in Indonesia. It's just a matter of time. The real mystery now is trying to figure out why Indonesia, and the island of Sulawesi in particular, was such a hotbed for artwork, especially since it was a world away from Spain and France, where most of the other artwork has been found. Shipwrecks. A dentist in Sicily, Italy, has just helped to rewrite the history surrounding one of the most important battles ever fought in Europe. It all began in the early 2000s, when archaeologist Sebastiano Tusa visited a dental surgeon in the Italian town of Trapani. At the office, he noticed that the dentist had a bronze piece from a Roman ship sitting on display. The dentist said it had been given to him by a local fisherman, but he didn't know its true significance. The archaeologist knew that it was incredibly important and suspected it may have come from the legendary Battle of the Aegates. The battle was fought between the Roman Republic and the Carthaginians. This was many centuries before Rome became an empire, back in 241 BC. It was the only battle of that era that took place in the waters around Sicily. It was the end of the First Punic War and the start of Rome's domination of the Mediterranean for the next 700 years. Clearly, this was an important battle, but historians have never been able to get any physical evidence of it happening because they didn't know where the shipwrecks were hiding. With help from this dentist, Sebastiano was able to track down where the relic in his office had come from. This eventually led to the discovery of dozens of shipwrecks scattered across the bottom of the Mediterranean. Historians are now putting together a real, historically accurate picture of what happened during the Battle of Aegates. The origin of mankind. A new discovery in Africa is challenging what we know about the origin of mankind. To understand what's happening with the origin of the human species, we need to go back to 1947. That was when Robert Broom and his colleagues discovered the fossils of an ancient pre-human nicknamed Mrs. Plez in a cave. This cave system in South Africa is known as the cradle of humankind, and it holds more Australopithecus fossils than anywhere in the world. Mrs. Ples turned out to be roughly 2.1 million years old, according to research at the time. It was named Australopithecus africanus, and scientists believed it to be the missing link between humans and primates. But that whole belief is changing. In fact, everything we thought we knew for the past 50 years has just been thrown out the window. A new study by researcher Daryl Granger has shown that the skull found in 1947 actually dates back about 3.6 million years. This is shocking because it would place the fossil found in South Africa in the same time as the ancient fossils of humans found in Ethiopia in the 1970s, like Lucy. While many people have considered South Africa to be the cradle of human civilization, it's actually in East Africa. Now that we know that Mrs. Ples dates to a similar period as Lucy and others, scientists once again need to go back to the drawing board to try to figure out where and when the earliest hominin that developed into the Homo genus lived. The story of Mesopotamia. New discoveries in Iraq could be changing the history books in regard to what we know about ancient Mesopotamia. Excavations were recently completed at the ancient complex of Girsu, done by researchers with the British Museum. According to archaeologist Sebastian Ray, the change in the timeline all has to do with irrigation. For the last few decades, historians have held the belief that the first real civilization of Sumer prospered because of irrigation. They learned how to move water to where they wanted it, which resulted in endless supplies of food. And with the world's first complex civilization stuffed on yummy snacks, they were able to focus on developing a system of writing, building massive temples, and growing their culture. But this may not actually be the case. Girsu is a very old city that was built by the Sumerians about 5,000 years ago. The archaeologists with the British Museum were trying to figure out just how extensive the irrigation system here was. What they found was that, in fact, the irrigation system dates back about 1,000 years before the city was born. In other words, the whole area had already been irrigated by extremely primitive farmers around the year 4300 BC. This means it wasn't irrigation that sparked urban construction and led to all kinds of advancements in technology. The irrigation had already been there. Scientists are now completely stunned because they don't know what the motivation was that pushed societies forward, if not water. Water had always been the key, but now it seems obvious that water had nothing to do with it. Feeding the masses. An ancient mosaic discovered inside of a mysterious church in Israel may just change history. The mosaic was made in the 5th century and depicts one of Jesus' most famous miracles. It was found immaculately preserved underneath the ashes of a fire inside a place called the Burnt Church. This is in the old city of Hippos, which overlooks the Sea of Galilee and was important during the Roman and Byzantine periods. The church itself was probably burned down in the 7th century when the last Persian Empire came through the region. But let's get back to the miracle. The mosaic shows when Jesus Christ supposedly fed 5,000 men using 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. This is incredible because it matches exactly with what was written in the New Testament. And according to the head of excavations, Michael Eisenberg, the burnt church is located in the exact spot where most of Jesus' miracles had occurred. This may not exactly change history, but it certainly shows a historical accuracy with the New Testament and further supports the idea that Jesus was real and maybe really did perform miracles. Greek tombs in Naples. In the Italian city of Naples, researchers recently investigated some Greek tombs inside an ancient cemetery that dates back over 2,300 years. This cemetery is unique in that it was full of Greek bodies, because the ancient city of Naples, called Neapolis by the Romans, was never truly Roman. It was founded by the Greeks in the 8th century BC. Even when the Romans came and took control of it, it still remained a Greek city. This is a monumental revelation because it shows that Naples has never really been Italian, but has always been Greek. The evidence is 40 feet beneath the city streets, down steep staircases and inside creepy underground tombs. The necropolis was originally dug into the hills outside the walls of Neapolis and filled with countless corpses. But because of mudslides, almost all the tombs have been buried and lost and are currently inaccessible. If you're wondering what kind of difference it makes whether the ancient city had Greek roots or Roman roots, let me take a quick second to explain. It's dramatically different because the Greeks and Romans, although they lived at the same time, were vastly different people. In the city of Neapolis, the Greeks would have been practicing for the Olympic Games, while at the same time, the citizens of nearby Pompeii would have been holding bloodthirsty gladiator battles, walking upright. For the past 200 years, scientists have generally accepted something called the savanna hypothesis. This is the hypothesis which claims human evolution happened on the open grasslands of Africa. The theory argues that about 8 million years ago, tropical forests began to retreat closer to the coastlines of Africa, leaving huge expansions of grasslands in the center. This vanishing of the forest forced our early primate ancestors to walk out onto the savanna, where the trees weren't so close together. The lack of trees forced our very distant ancestors to stop swinging from branch to branch and walk upright. And this was how human evolution happened. But that may not actually be how it happened, because looking at the geological history of Africa, researchers have already seen that tropical African grasslands expanded at least 3 million years before the first hominids started walking on 2 feet. What this means is that the early hominids were already out in the savanna plodding around before they began to walk upright like humans. To say that they had to walk upright because they ran out of trees just doesn't make sense. Even in the grasslands, there would have been plenty of patches of jungle. It's not like they were wandering around in the middle of a flat desert. The consensus is that scientists don't actually know how humans evolved. That is to say, for all of their theories, none of them have been proven. We just don't know what caused early primates to take their first steps. Thanks for watching! Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and come back soon for another video. See you later! Bye!